They said Sonny Black Napolitano never begged for his life. No pleading, no excuses, no attempt to run. He just nodded once, straightened his tie, and walked into the silence like a man who'd already accepted what was coming. Before we go any further, take a breath. It's going to be a long night. Tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? Because tonight, we're stepping back into the shadows of Brooklyn to trace the quiet fall of a man who lived and died by one word: loyalty. And if you're settling in with us, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Long Gangster Nights, where we keep the stories of loyalty, betrayal, and honor alive long after the streets have gone quiet. Let's begin. The year was 1981. New York was sweating through another summer, a city cracked with tension, power struggles, and the faint smell of gasoline that seemed to hang over every dark corner. In Brooklyn's Williamsburg, on the edge of the East River, there was a small, quiet apartment above a bar called the Motion Lounge. That was where Dominic "Sonny Black" Napolitano held court. Not in a skyscraper, not in a casino, but in that dimly lit room where he could keep an eye on the streets and listen to the whispers of the world he ruled. He wasn't like other bosses. There was no gold chain around his neck, no loud laughter announcing his arrival. Sonny was the kind of man who spoke softly and made others listen. He believed in presence, not volume, in silence, not threats. He was a man of the old code, from a time when being made meant something sacred. He'd earned his stripes the hard way, coming up from the streets when Brooklyn still meant something, when being a man of respect wasn't about flash or fear, but about keeping your word. The streets knew who he was long before he wore the crown of a capo in the Bonanno family. He'd been a soldier, an enforcer, a negotiator, and above all, a man who believed in balance. Every morning, he'd rise before dawn, brew a pot of black coffee, and feed his pigeons on the rooftop. They were his peace, his one escape from the noise below. The neighbors used to joke that he loved those birds more than people, but that wasn't true. Sonny didn't love Eastleigh, but when he did, it was absolute, and that would be his undoing to understand Sonny Black. You have to understand the world he inherited, a mafia that was shifting beneath its own weight. The old-school bosses of the 1950s and 60s, men like Carlo Gambino and Joe Bonanno, had built empires on rules, hierarchy, and respect. But by the late 70s, the landscape had changed. Cocaine money was flooding the streets, and the young guns were getting reckless. The code was cracking, the loyalty thinning, and in that chaos, Sonny stood like a man trying to hold back the tide. His apartment above the Motion Lounge wasn't just a place to live, it was a symbol of who he was. He liked being close to his people, to the street. He didn't hide in mansions or jet around the world. You could find him sitting at the bar, drink in hand, quietly watching over his men. He wasn't the kind of boss who sent others to do his work. He showed up, handled business himself. There was something paternal in it, almost gentle. But beneath that quiet exterior was a man who understood exactly what kind of world he lived in and what it demanded. Those who worked for Sonny described him as fair, measured, consistent. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried weight. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He was the kind of man who could make you feel respected and terrified in the same breath. He had this calmness, that rare kind of power that comes from being completely at peace with who you are. But behind that peace, behind the calm eyes and soft voice, was a storm building. Because the man he would come to trust most, Donnie Brasco, wasn't who he thought he was. Sonny first met Donnie through Lefty Ruggiero, one of his closest friends and soldiers. Lefty had taken Donnie under his wing, a young jewel thief from Florida who seemed to understand life. Quiet, observant, polite, not flashy like most wannabes. Lefty vouched for him, saying the kid had promise. And if Lefty believed in him, Sonny listened. Their first encounter was in a small cafe. Nothing glamorous, just a few cups of coffee, some quiet conversation. Donnie wasn't nervous. That was what Sonny noticed. Most new guys fidgeted, talked too much, and tried to prove themselves. But Donnie, he listened. He spoke only when asked, and when he did, his words were clean, simple, steady. Sonny respected that trust in the Mafia wasn't built overnight. It was layered, day by day, test by test. You don't hand a man your life until he's earned it, and even then, you keep one eye open. But Donnie had something different, something that felt real. Over time, Sonny let him closer. He brought him to meetings, let him sit in on business, taught him the rhythms of life. And all the while, Donnie's tape recorder, hidden somewhere beneath his clothes, captured every word. But Sonny didn't see betrayal. What he saw was potential, a younger man who seemed to get it, who wasn't in it for the money or the glory, but for the principle of life. That was what Sonny respected most, men who lived by something even in a world full of killers. Sonny wasn't known for cruelty. He had lines he wouldn't cross. He hated unnecessary violence. He'd say, "If a man deserves it, fine, but don't make a show of it." He had a deep sense of balance, justice, in his own way. That's what made his final chapter so tragic, because when the truth came out, when Donnie Brasco was unmasked as FBI agent Joseph D. Piston, it wasn't just betrayal, it was the collapse of Sonny's entire belief system. Everything he'd stood for, honor, trust, loyalty, turned to dust overnight. But that's not where we are yet. Right now, in the quiet rhythm of 1980, Sonny still believed in the world he helped build. The Motion Lounge was still humming with late-night laughter. Lefty was still grumbling over lost bets and uncollected debts. Donnie was still one of them. And Sonny was still the quiet boss who believed he could keep the world steady through sheer willpower. Sometimes, when the night stretched long and the rain whispered against the window, Sonny would sit alone in his apartment, a cigarette burning low in the ashtray, and stare out over the city. The pigeons slept in their coops above him. The streets murmured below. He'd think about the old days, about how easy it was to lose yourself in this life. Maybe he sensed the end was coming, or maybe he just knew that men like him didn't get to retire. He once told a friend, "When you live this life, you don't get to walk away clean. You do your time, one way or another." There was no bitterness in it, just acceptance. That was Sonny's way. He wasn't chasing money anymore. He wasn't looking for power. What he wanted was peace, a kind of peace that couldn't exist in the life he chose. But he stayed anyway, because to him, walking away wasn't honorable. That's the paradox of men like Sonny Black Napolitano. They were built for a code that no longer existed, but they couldn't stop living by it, even when it doomed them in the months to come. that loyalty, that code, would be tested in ways no one could have imagined. And as the web around him began to tighten, as the walls of deceit closed in, Sonny wouldn't fight it. He'd stand tall, take what was his, and never once look away. He'd feed his pigeons one last time, lock his door behind him, and walk into the kind of silence that only men of his word can understand. Because for Sonny Black, loyalty wasn't a word, it was the only truth he ever knew. Before he was Sonny Black, he was just Dominic Napolitano, a quiet kid from Williamsburg, Brooklyn, back when the neighborhood smelled like bread and diesel. Before the high-rises, Williamsburg was a place where boys grew up fast, where your family name meant something, and where the wrong look could get you taught a lesson you'd never forget. He came from working people, not rich, not powerful, but proud. His father was a dock worker, his mother a homemaker who believed in the church and the rosary. But faith doesn't always protect you from hunger. The Depression had passed, the war had come and gone, but the struggle stayed. And like a lot of Brooklyn kids in the 40s, Sonny looked out his window and saw two kinds of men, the ones breaking their backs for a few dollars, and the ones who didn't seem to struggle at all. They were the men in silk suits, the ones who tipped the butcher with $50 bills, who never hurried, never shouted. They were respected, feared, sure, but respected more. They were the men who got called Mister by cops who pretended not to see. For a kid like Sonny, that left a mark. But here's the thing about Sonny Black. He never started out chasing power. He didn't have that hunger for fame, that itch to be known. He was different. He watched, learned, kept quiet. He figured out early that talking gets you noticed, and being noticed gets you in trouble. He was a listener. That was his first weapon. As a teenager, he ran errands, numbers, small jobs, always clean, always on time. He didn't run his mouth, didn't brag. That's how the old-timers noticed him. They said, that Napolitano kid, he's steady. You can trust him. That word trust would follow him his whole life. It would make him, and in the end, it would destroy him. By the 1950s, Sonny had built a reputation, not for violence, though he could be violent, but for discipline. In a world full of hotheads, he stayed cool. Even when things went bad, he never panicked. He once told a young soldier, if you lose your head, you already lost. He didn't drink much, didn't gamble heavily, didn't chase women around. He believed that a man's downfall always started with indulgence. He wasn't moral. This was still the Mafia. But he believed in control. That's what drew the Bonanno family to him. He came up under the old guard, men who'd served Joe Bonanno himself. When the family was one of the most respected in New York, they saw in Sonny something rare, balance. He didn't talk too much, didn't ask for too much, didn't show off. He was useful, the kind of man who could settle a score without starting a war. And little by little, he climbed. He learned how to make money the old-fashioned way, shylocking, gambling, protection. He never touched drugs, said it made animals out of men. While others got rich quick off heroin, Sonny stayed small, steady, clean. He built loyalty instead of empires. And in the Mafia, that's the slow road, but it's the one that lasts. The streets started calling him Sonny Black, Sonny for his easy smile, Black for his slick hair and dark suits, always dressed neat, always pressed, always composed. If you saw him walk into a bar, you'd notice how everything seemed to quiet down just a little. He wasn't loud, But everyone felt him. In a world full of noise, egos, shouting, gunfire, Sonny's calm was his dominance. He didn't need to tell you who he was. He'd just look at you, and you'd know. Even the cops respected him. They said, "Sonny Black, he's a gentleman gangster." He'd talk to them polite, never raise his voice. They couldn't catch him doing anything direct. He was too smart for that. Always 2 steps removed. Always letting others take the risk. But make no mistake, under that quiet, there was steel. He could be ruthless when he had to. You didn't survive long in that world by being soft. If someone crossed him, Sonny handled it quick, clean, final. No speeches, no spectacle, just a quiet disappearance. And then life went on. What set him apart was his code. He believed that men should live by rules, even gangsters. He said, if you don't have rules, you're just a punk with a gun. He believed in keeping promises, in paying debts, in respecting the chain of command. He didn't backstab, didn't gossip, didn't play politics. That made him old school, even then. By the 1970s, the Mafia was changing. The old families were falling apart. Too much greed, too many rats, too much cocaine money, poisoning everything. But Sonny tried to hold the line. He treated his men like family. When they needed money, he helped them. When they messed up, he corrected them quietly but firmly. He didn't need to threaten. His disappointment was enough. You'd hear soldiers talk about him in hushed tones. Sonny, he's solid. You can sleep easy under him. That kind of reputation is rare, but it also paints a target on your back. Because in the Mafia, calmness looks like confidence, and confidence looks like control. And control is what everyone else wants. Still, for years, Sonny managed to walk that line, respected by his peers, loved by his crew, feared by outsiders. And then came the Motion Lounge. It was a small bar on Graham Avenue, nothing special, but it became his base, his world. From that corner of Brooklyn, he ran operations, held meetings, and kept watch. He liked it because it was close to home. He could be among his people, his pigeons, his streets, and one day, into that world, walked a new face, a man named Donnie Brasco. But that's another story. The story of trust, betrayal, and the slow death of a code. For now, this is how you should remember Sonny Black, a man who believed that power was best worn quietly, a man who never shouted, but was always heard. A man who rose, not because he was loudest, but because when the dust settled, he was the last man standing. He came from nothing, lived by honor, and in the end, died for it. By the time the 1960s rolled in, the Mafia world in New York was shifting like wet concrete, slowly, heavily, but permanently. The old dons were fading, their rules softening, their soldiers growing restless. Streets that once moved with quiet order were now humming with ambition, cocaine, and paranoia. And in the middle of that uncertain era, Sonny Black Napolitano began his silent climb through the Bonanno family. Not with noise, not with muscle, but with the one currency that still mattered, trust in that world. You didn't get promoted for shouting or shooting. You rose because other men could depend on you to keep your word, keep your cool, and keep your mouth shut. And that was Sonny, the man who never promised more than he could deliver, never complained when things went south, and never disappeared when things got hot. He was the man you could hand $1,000 to, or a body, and you'd know it'd be handled. No drama, no leaks, no stories. The Bonanno family had always prided itself on being a family in the truest sense, close-knit, secretive, built on personal ties. Under Joe Bonanno, it was almost like a corporation of blood and silence. The code of omerta wasn't just a rule, it was religion, and Sonny fit right into that faith. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, and that made him invisible, the best kind of powerful dot in the early days. He ran Shylock operations, small loans, neighborhood gambling, protection money. Every dollar that came through his hands was accounted for. No skimming, no funny business. That's what impressed the higher-ups. Men like Philip, Rusty Rostelli, Carmine Galanti, they all noticed Sonny because he didn't try to impress them. He just did his job. He understood something most young wise guys didn't. The mob didn't reward excitement. It rewarded dependability. You could be violent, you could be clever, you could be mean, but if you couldn't be trusted, you were dead weight. Sonny was the opposite. He made money, he made peace, and he made others look good. That's how he climbed by the late 1960s. Sonny was acting as a capo regime, running his own small crew. It wasn't official yet, but everyone knew it was coming. He operated out of Brooklyn's Motion Lounge, a small, unassuming bar with a back room where deals were made, jokes were shared, and lives were decided. The Motion Lounge became his home base, and, like Sonny himself, it was modest but efficient. The back room was his world, a wooden table, worn chairs, the faint smell of cigars and whiskey. On slow afternoons, he'd sit by the window, pigeons fluttering on the ledge, watching the street below. That was his rhythm, calm, observant, steady. While other captains were out flashing cars or chasing women, Sonny stayed put, close to his neighborhood. He believed in roots. The Bonanno family of that era was a strange machine, disciplined yet unstable. After Joe Bonanno's so-called retirement and his failed attempt to reclaim control, the family fractured, factions formed, alliances crumbled. There were old-school men who still lived by the code, and younger ones who saw the mob as a fast track to cash. The newer guys didn't care about honor. They cared about power. They were loud, reckless, ambitious, the opposite of Sonny. But somehow, he navigated it. While others fell, he adapted. He kept his head down, kept his crew tight. He never aligned too strongly with any faction, not out of fear, but wisdom. He once told a friend, "When two lions fight, stay in the tall grass." That was Sonny's philosophy, patience over pride. What really set him apart was how he treated people. To his men, he wasn't a boss barking orders. He was like a quiet father. If someone needed rent money, Sonny covered it. If a soldier messed up, he didn't humiliate him. He talked to him privately. He didn't need to scream to make you respect him. His silence did that for him. You could disappoint Sonny, but you'd never want to. The Bonanno higher-ups loved that about him. He could keep peace in his crew without calling in the muscle. That was rare, because in those years, peace was a luxury. The city was exploding with crime, drugs, extortion, robberies, and the mob's clean money was getting dirtier by the day. The feds were starting to circle, and paranoia was creeping in. Sonny stayed old school. No drugs, no chaos. He told his men, if you can't make a living with respect, you don't deserve one. That wasn't just talk, he lived it. He ran gambling dens that never got raided because everyone knew the rules. No civilians, no heat, no stupid noise. In the mob, reputation was everything, and Sonny's was gold. Guys from other families wanted to work with him because they knew he wouldn't double-cross them. He was the kind of man you could do business with, as the saying went, not because he was easy, but because he was fair. You made a deal with Sonny, you could sleep at night. Even law enforcement knew him, or at least knew of him. Detectives in Brooklyn had his name in their files, but they all said the same thing: he's not like the others. He didn't flaunt power, didn't throw parties, didn't draw attention. He ran his business like a quiet storm, efficient, invisible, inevitable. Inside the family, he became known for another thing: clean leadership. No personal grudges, no petty rivalries. If there was a dispute between soldiers, he listened to both sides, found a compromise. It wasn't weakness, it was control. He knew that every unnecessary war cost money, blood, and time. He'd rather talk for hours than bury a friend. And yet, beneath that calm, there was always a shadow. Sonny understood that trust in the Mafia was a fragile illusion. Every man who called you friend might one day call you liability. Every toast could be a prelude to a funeral. That's why he stayed careful, not paranoid, just aware. He'd never turn his back, never fully relax. He lived in a world where yesterday's ally could be tomorrow's shooter. As the 1970s arrived, Sonny Black's power was official. He became a captain in the Bonanno family, running one of the most respected crews in Brooklyn. His men made steady money. No noise, no headlines. Even the bosses liked him because he didn't make problems, he solved them. He wasn't a visionary or a philosopher. He was something rarer, a steady hand in a storm. While others chased glory, he chased order. And that's what made his later story so tragic, because when the world around him began to rot, Sonny still tried to live by a code that no longer existed. He was a man from an era of loyalty, surrounded by men chasing greed. He still believed in handshakes when everyone else believed in wiretaps. He still thought friendship meant something when everyone else was playing survival. That's why, when a man named Donnie Brasco came along, polite, streetwise, loyal, Sonny didn't see danger. He saw a reflection of the code he thought still lived. He saw the kind of man he used to be, and that's what made all the difference, because in a world built on lies, Sonny Black's greatest sin was believing in one truth: that loyalty still mattered. He didn't know that loyalty would soon be the noose around his neck. By the late 1970s, New York was changing faster than the Mafia could keep up. The skyline grew taller, the streets louder, and the men who once ruled the underworld began to fade into whispers. The mob wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't the tight-knit brotherhood built on silence and respect that Sonny Black had grown up believing in. It was turning into something uglier, noisier, and far more dangerous. Sonny watched it all happen from behind the counter of the Motion Lounge, the Brooklyn bar that doubled as his office, courtroom, and sanctuary. Every morning, he'd arrive before the doors opened, sit at his usual spot by the window, light a cigarette, and just watch. The young guys swaggered by in flashy suits, driving Cadillacs they couldn't afford, bragging about money they didn't earn. They were loud, impatient, and worst of all, careless, Sonny used to say. The best man in this life is the one nobody knows. But these kids wanted everyone to know who they were. They wanted to be legends before they'd even paid their dues. The old-timers, like Sonny, came from a time when you earned respect through years of quiet work, not through fear or flash. You didn't take pictures, didn't tell stories, didn't leave a trail. He lived by the old code omerta, the sacred vow of silence. It wasn't just about keeping your mouth shut. It was about how you carried yourself. You didn't gossip. You didn't boast. You didn't draw heat. Your word was your bond, and your dignity was the only currency that mattered. The younger generation, though they didn't care, they were part of the new mob, a generation raised on fast money and faster betrayal. They saw drugs as a quick payday, where the old guard saw them as poison. They didn't care about keeping the peace. They wanted chaos because chaos paid better. Sonny had no patience for it. He wasn't a preacher, but he believed that once a man broke omerta, once he started chasing fame or greed, he was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. In the motion lounge, you could feel the clash between eras. The veterans sat in the back, sipping espresso, talking in low voices. The young bloods crowded near the bar, bragging about who they'd shaken down, who they'd robbed, who they'd scared. Sonny would sit there, silent, listening. Sometimes he'd nod. Sometimes he'd just stare through the smoke, letting the silence do the talking. Once, when a young soldier bragged about roughing up a guy who owed money, Sonny calmly put down his coffee and said, "If a man owes you, you get your money. You don't break his jaw. You break his fear." One's loud, the other lasts. The room went quiet. That was Sonny's power. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the weight of his words to Sonny. The Mafia wasn't supposed to be about fear or cruelty. It was about order. A hidden world with its own laws, its own sense of justice. You didn't hurt civilians. You didn't drag attention. You didn't betray friends. That was the code. And even when everyone else started forgetting it, he held on like it was scripture. He'd often say, "We used to be ghosts. Now we're clowns." That line stung because it was true. The feds were closing in like never before, not because they were smarter, but because the mob had gotten wiretaps, informants, photos. All of it came from loose lips. Guys were talking too much, fighting too much, bragging too much, but not Sonny. He still lived the way he always had, quietly, methodically, without excess. His apartment was simple. A few pieces of furniture, a bed, a shelf of old books. He wasn't rich, not really. He could have been, but that wasn't the point. Money was supposed to serve loyalty, not replace it. There were men who feared Sonny, but none who hated him. Even his rivals respected him because he played clean. When there was a dispute, he handled it, faced no surprises, no cheap shots. That's what the old code demanded: respect, even in conflict. But Sonny knew he was becoming a relic. He saw how the rules were dying one by one. First came the drugs. The bosses had forbidden them for decades, but greed cracked the code. Then came the betrayal. Informants turning on friends to shave years off their sentences. The word rat used to mean death. Now it was just another business deal. He saw how the young ones treated omerta like a superstition, something to quote, not something to live. And that hurt him more than any threat ever could. He'd sit in the back of the motion lounge with a glass of coffee, watching the younger capos argue over territory. He'd think about how different it used to be when men like Joe Bonanno and Carlo Gambino led with quiet strength, when a man's silence was more powerful than any gun. He confided to a close friend, "We used to be knights. Now we're vultures. But he didn't give up, not Sonny. He kept teaching the code to his men, even if he knew the world around him was breaking it. He told them, never lie to your crew, never short the boss, never take a deal, never talk to law, and above all, never betray a friend. That was the one rule he lived by, the one that defined him. Because to Sonny, betrayal was the one sin that couldn't be forgiven, and maybe that's what doomed him in the end. Because when a man like Donnie Brasco walked into his life, respectful, loyal, soft-spoken, Sonny didn't see a threat. He saw hope. He saw a throwback to the days when men had honor, when a handshake meant forever. He didn't see an undercover agent. He saw a reflection of the code he was fighting to keep alive. In another life, maybe Sonny would have survived. But he was too loyal to the past, too faithful to the rules that no longer protected anyone. And as the 1980s approached, the age of informants, indictments, and microphones hidden in lamps, Sonny Black became a man out of time, standing alone with his fading principles in a world that no longer believed in them. He still wore his suits pressed, still tipped his hat, and still greeted every man with respect. Because for Sonny, dignity wasn't negotiable. Even when the world turned its back on honor, he refused to. That was the old code. It couldn't save him, but it made him unforgettable. Sonny Black Napolitano had seen hundreds of men come and go through the doors of the Motion Lounge. Some came to pay respect, some to do business, some to disappear. But every once in a while, someone walked in who didn't quite fit, not in a bad way, but in that rare, quiet sense that made you look twice. That's how it was the first time Sonny met Donnie Brasco. It was a humid Brooklyn afternoon, sunlight bleeding through the blinds in narrow streaks. The Motion Lounge was half empty, just the regulars killing time over coffee, cards, and whispers. Sonny was sitting at his usual table near the back, reading the daily news, half listening to the jukebox humming low. Then Lefty Ruggiero came in with a new face beside him, a man who carried himself like he'd been around, but didn't need everyone to know it. "Sonny," Lefty said, "this here's Donnie. Donnie good kid, makes money in diamonds down in Florida." Sonny looked up from his paper. Donnie didn't rush forward, didn't smile too wide. He just nodded once, respectful, easy. "Nice to meet you, Sonny." Sonny studied him the way old school guys did. Eyes sharp, expression unreadable. The kid looked clean, not too polished. The kind of man who'd seen enough of the world to be cautious, but not paranoid. He wasn't loud. He wasn't desperate. He wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. That alone set him apart. Lefty was already talking a mile a minute, bragging about Donnie's score in Miami, how he'd fenced some stolen jewelry, made good money, and kept his mouth shut about everything. But Sonny wasn't listening to Lefty's sales pitch. He was listening to Donnie's silence. Most guys, when they met Sonny, tried too hard. They dropped names, made promises, threw around big talk about loyalty or money. Donnie didn't. He sat there, hands calm on the table, eyes steady, letting Lefty talk. That told Sonny more than any story could. "Jewels, huh?" Sonny said after a pause, his voice low and rough like gravel. "Yeah," Donnie said. "Easier than sticking up trucks. Less noise, more class." Sonny's lip twitched, almost a smile. "Less heat too," he said. Donnie just nodded. "That's the idea. That's when Sonny knew the kid had something. Not flash, not power, but composure. He liked that. The world was full of reckless men trying to make fast money. But this Donnie, he carried patience like a weapon. For a while, Sonny let Lefty take Donnie under his wing. That was Lefty's nature. He liked to teach, to show a guy the ropes. Sonny stayed back, watching how Donnie handled things. He had his ways of testing people. The first test was always time. Could they show up, stay quiet, and not make mistakes? The second was loyalty, who they listened to when things went bad. Donnie passed both. He started showing up at the Motion Lounge regularly. Never late, never loud. He'd take his seat near Lefty, listen more than he spoke. Laugh just enough to be part of the room, but never enough to draw attention. When business was discussed, he stayed quiet unless spoken to. He didn't drink much, didn't chase women, didn't run his mouth. He was the kind of guy Sonny could have a conversation with at 2 a.m. and not worry about what he'd repeat to someone else. Weeks passed, and Sonny started asking him small questions. About Miami, about fencing diamonds, about who he knew. Nothing direct, just little probes to see how quick Donnie could think. Every answer was clean. No hesitation, no cracks. He wasn't just rehearsed, he was consistent. One night, after everyone else had gone, Sonny told Lefty to stay back. "You like this kid?" he asked. Lefty grinned. "Like him? I'd vouch for him. He's solid." Sonny nodded slowly. That was no small thing. A man's vouch was a bullet. It could kill you if you gave it to the wrong person. But Lefty was old school too. He wouldn't put his name on just anyone. Over time, Donnie became a fixture, not flashy, but dependable. He started earning money for the crew, doing small jobs, collecting from Shylocks, fencing stolen goods. Nothing big, just enough to build trust. Sonny saw it, the way Donnie respected the rules, the way he deferred to Lefty, the way he carried himself with quiet discipline. It reminded Sonny of himself when he was younger. The calm before ambition, the hunger without the noise. One day, as they sat in the back room over espresso, Sonny looked across the table and said, "You know, Donnie, you're not like the other guys. You don't talk too much. You don't act like you got something to prove." Donnie shrugged. "Talking don't make money." That made Sonny laugh, a short, low laugh that almost startled the others in the room. "You keep thinking like that, you'll be around for a long time." It was small moments like that where the bond began, not forced, not planned, just built quietly through the everyday rhythm of the life. Sonny didn't know it then, but every word, every nod, every small show of trust was another brick in the wall being built around him. He began to take Donnie more seriously, inviting him to sit in on meetings, asking his opinion on things, letting him see a little more of how the world really worked. Not much, just enough to make Donnie feel part of something real. At first, the others whispered, "Who's this new guy? Where'd he come from?" But Sonny didn't care. His word carried weight. If Sonny said someone was good, that was it. No one questioned it twice. The deeper Donnie got, the more Sonny started to treat him like a nephew. Not family by blood, but by conduct. They'd share quiet conversations in the back of the lounge. Donnie never pushed for too much. He let Sonny lead the way. That patience, that restraint, made Sonny trust him more. Sometimes Sonny would talk about the old days, about how the Mafia used to mean something different, how men stood by their word, how betrayal was worse than death. Donnie would listen, nodding in agreement. And in those long, smoky nights, it felt to Sonny like he'd found a kindred spirit. What Sonny couldn't see, what he couldn't have imagined, was that the man across from him wasn't a jewel thief from Miami. He was an FBI agent, deep undercover, every word recorded, every moment analyzed. But in that small Brooklyn bar, under the hum of the jukebox and the glow of the overhead lights, all Sonny saw was loyalty. He saw a man who respected the code. He saw a man who understood silence. He saw a reflection of himself, calm, loyal, unshakable. And for the first time in years, Sonny believed that maybe, just maybe, the old code wasn't dead after all. It was alive, sitting right in front of him, wearing the name Donnie Brasco. By the late 1970s, the Bonanno family had weathered years of chaos, arrests, power struggles, shifting alliances. The air in Brooklyn was thick with paranoia. Everyone was watching everyone else. But through it all, Sonny Black Napolitano moved with quiet authority, calm, steady, never rushed. He believed in loyalty above all else. Money came and went. Trust, once lost, was gone forever. That was the world he ruled, a world built not on greed, but on belief. And now, into that world, he was bringing Donnie Brasco. It didn't happen overnight. Sonny wasn't the kind of man to hand out trust like free drinks at the bar. He observed Donnie, how he handled small jobs, how he talked to people, how he reacted when tempers flared. When guys got loud, Donnie stayed quiet. When deals went bad, he didn't complain. When money was short, he made it up without excuses. Sonny liked that it reminded him of the old-timers, the men who didn't need to prove they were gangsters because their conduct spoke for them. So one night, after a long day of collections, Sonny called Donnie into the back of the Motion Lounge. The room was dim, just the blue haze of cigarette smoke and the hum of the ice machine in the corner. Lefty was there, too, leaning back in his chair, tired but proud. Sonny poured 3 glasses of scotch. He didn't say anything at first, just slid 1 glass across to Donnie, then raised his own. To business, he said. They clinked glasses. Donnie waited. He knew something was coming. Sonny set his drink down and leaned forward. Lefty vouches for you. That means something. But I don't go by words. I go by what I see, and I've been watching. Donnie nodded once, saying nothing. You handle yourself good, Sonny continued. You don't talk out a line. You don't chase nonsense. You keep your eyes open. I like that. He paused. So here's what I'm saying. From now on, you deal through me. You answer to me. You make money. You come see me. That's the circle. Donnie's chest tightened. This was it, the moment he'd been working toward for years. He was officially inside. Lefty smiled like a proud uncle. Told ya, he's solid. Sonny, kid's a stand-up guy. Sonny gave a small nod. We'll see how solid he is when the street starts testing him. From that day on, Donnie was part of Sonny's crew, the inner circle. He got a table in the back room, a seat in meetings, a cut of the profits. But more importantly, he got something no FBI agent could ever plan for: respect. Sonny's respect wasn't bought. It was earned, one quiet act at a time. Donnie saw it firsthand. the way Sonny handled disputes, the way he calmed hotheads before things got bloody, the way he enforced discipline without raising his voice. Money's good, Sonny would say, but loyalty, that's forever. You can lose $1 and make another. You lose trust and you're dead. He lived by it. When other bosses were chasing fast cash, Sonny was making men. He believed the Mafia's strength came from its code: respect, silence, discipline. The new generation didn't understand that. They wanted quick scores, drug money, flash. But Sonny held the line, and to his mind, Donnie was proof that the old ways still worked. He brought him deeper into meetings, the kind where names weren't written down, and the walls themselves were trusted not to speak. He let Donnie handle more serious work, introducing him to higher-ups, letting him collect envelopes from trusted earners, even sit in on talks with capos. Sonny was grooming him, not as a soldier, as a made man in waiting. It was the highest form of trust a boss could give in quiet moments. Sonny would talk to Donnie like a mentor, not about business, but about life. You want to last in this thing, he'd say, stirring his espresso with a small silver spoon. You gotta keep your head cold. Guys who act on emotion, they don't make old bones. Sometimes he'd sigh, stare out the window at the Brooklyn streetlights. You know, this life used to mean something. We had rules. Now, half these kids don't know what omerta even means. They get pinched, they talk. No backbone. Donnie would nod. That's not me, Sonny. I know, Sonny said quietly. That's why you're here. The deeper Donnie went, the more he saw that Sonny's loyalty wasn't weakness, it was faith. He trusted the men around him because he believed in the structure, the code, the idea that even criminals could live by honor. It was tragic, in a way, because that same faith was what would kill him. But for now, in the dim light of the Motion Lounge, surrounded by men who would live and die by their word, Sonny felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope that there were still men who understood what this thing was supposed to be. Hope that loyalty wasn't dead. Hope that maybe, just maybe, Donnie Brasco would be the one to carry it on in a world built on violence. Sonny Black Napolitano stood out because he didn't need to raise his voice to be obeyed. He ruled through presence, a quiet gravity that drew respect without ever demanding it. Where other bosses barked orders or tried to impress through fear, Sonny led like a man who understood that real power was never loud. It was calm. It was measured. It was earned. His days followed a rhythm, one that blended the ordinary and the deadly in ways that only the Mafia could make seem natural. He'd wake early, make strong espresso on the stove of his modest apartment overlooking the waterfront in Brooklyn. The sun would rise slow and gold over the harbor, reflecting off the water like a promise he knew better than to trust. He'd lean against the window, sip his coffee, and watch the boats move across the East River to the outside world. He was just another man in the neighborhood, quiet, polite, with a firm handshake and tired eyes. To those who knew better, he was the beating heart of the Bonanno family. In his apartment, there were no luxury paintings or marble counters, no lavish displays of wealth, just clean floors, neat stacks of books and papers, and in the corner, by the window, the bird cage. Sonny loved birds, parrots, canaries, finches. He took care of them himself, cleaned the cages every morning, fed them seeds and small pieces of fruit. He said they relaxed him, their chirping, their order, their simplicity. In those little creatures, he found something that reminded him of peace, or maybe innocence, something long lost in the streets below. "Birds don't lie," he once told Donnie, as he opened a small cage and let a canary perch on his finger. "You feed them, you treat them right, they sing. You betray them, they don't. They're not like that. You feed a man, and he still finds a reason to bite your hand." Donnie nodded, remembering every word, because in that small act he saw who Sonny really was. A man trapped between two worlds, the human and the animal, loyalty and betrayal, life and death. He ruled over killers, but his soul belonged to quieter things. When Sonny went out, his walk was slow but purposeful. He wore plain suits, never flashy, always clean. He had no need for bodyguards or entourages. The men in his neighborhood would nod respectfully, "Hey, Sonny," and he'd nod back. No arrogance, no display. The kind of man who could walk into a room and silence it without saying a word. Not because they feared him, but because they respected him. Even rivals had to admit it. Sonny Black, one old-timer once said, "He's a man you could sit across from, talk straight, and walk out alive." You don't get that much anymore. That was his reputation. Fair, calm, consistent. He handled disputes like a judge, never rushing to violence unless there was no other way. When someone in his crew made a mistake, skimmed a little off the top, missed a payment, Sonny didn't start with threats. He started with a conversation. He believed men deserved the chance to explain themselves before they were condemned. It wasn't mercy, exactly. It was discipline, because once you crossed that line, once you broke his trust, you didn't get a second chance. His power came not from fear, but from balance. Men trusted Sonny because he didn't lie to them. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He didn't hide behind politics or other bosses. If Sonny told you something, you could set your watch by it. One evening, after a long day at the Motion Lounge, Sonny and Donnie took a quiet drive to the waterfront. They didn't talk much. Sonny wasn't a man of wasted words. The city lights shimmered off the black water, and the smell of salt and gasoline mixed in the cool air. Sonny leaned against the rail, smoking, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You see that?" he said, nodding toward the skyline. "Brooklyn, Manhattan, all that." He exhaled a thin trail of smoke. "Guys think that's power, the lights, the buildings, the money. But real power," he tapped his chest, "it's knowing when not to pull the trigger, when to sit quiet and let the other guy talk himself into a hole." Donnie stayed silent, just listening. "Anybody can kill," Sonny said softly. "Not everybody can lead." That line, "anybody can kill, not everybody can lead," became the essence of who Sonny Black was. He lived it. Every decision he made came from that principle. He could be ruthless when the situation demanded it, but never cruel for sport. The violence around him wasn't personal. It was part of the world he had chosen. He didn't enjoy it. He managed it. He often said, "The street don't forgive mistakes. It don't forget weakness, but it respects a man who don't lose his cool." And he never did. Even when the walls started closing in, even when the whispers started, when the cracks in the Bonanno family began to show, Sonny remained calm. Like a captain steering a ship through fog, he never panicked. The crew took strength from that. As long as Sonny was steady, They believed they'd survive. At home, though, Sonny's calm had cracks. There were nights when he'd pour himself a drink, sit by the window with the birds asleep in their cages, and just stare at the dark water. He didn't have much family left. The life he'd chosen didn't allow for that. The street became his home, his crew, his brothers. But solitude, that was his companion. Sometimes Donnie would stop by late, and Sonny would still be awake. "You don't sleep much, huh?" Donnie asked once, smiling. Sonny smirked faintly. "Sleep's for men with clean consciences." There was no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance, a quiet understanding that every man paid his dues one way or another, some with bullets, others with sleepless nights. Still, there was a gentleness in him that most people never saw. When a kid from the neighborhood got into trouble, stealing cars, fighting Sonny would call the kid's father, talk to him, straighten things out before the cops got involved. He never wanted innocent blood on his hands. He saw the street as a system, brutal, yes, but not without its order. His version of the Mafia was one of balance, discipline, and care, silence and respect. He didn't see himself as a criminal. He saw himself as a keeper of order in a chaotic world. And for all his sins, that belief gave him peace. People often forget that the Mafia wasn't made up of monsters. It was made up of men like Sonny, flawed, tired, honorable in their own way. Men who found structure in an unstructured world. And Sonny, above them all, was the kind of man who could see both sides of the moral coin and still walk a straight line down the middle. His apartment, his birds, his late-night walks by the water, they weren't escapes. They were anchors. Small things that reminded him he was still human, because in the life he lived, humanity was the first thing that slipped away. But Sonny never let go completely. He remained a quiet storm, gentle on the surface, unshakable underneath. And in that silence, in that calm, lay the true power of Sonny Black Napolitano, a man who led not through fear, but through faith in a code that the world around him had long begun to forget. In the world, Sonny Black Napolitano ruled. Was never about titles, it was about burden. Every dollar earned, every hand shaken, every order given carried its own kind of weight. And for Sonny, that weight grew heavier with every passing year. As a capo in the Bonanno family, his responsibilities stretched far beyond money and muscle. He was the mediator of feuds, the keeper of peace, the one everyone turned to when blood threatened to spill over street corners or business deals. His phone never stopped ringing. Every night at the Motion Lounge, men came in with problems, small-time earners with excuses, old-timers with grievances, soldiers whispering rumors about who said what, and Sonny listened to them all, always with that same quiet patience. He'd sit in the back booth, hands folded, cigarette burning slow between his fingers, his sharp eyes moving from one man to the next. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He let the noise die down, let the room breathe. Then, when the silence became thick enough to command attention, he'd speak. "All right," he'd say, his tone steady, deliberate. "Now we're gonna fix this the right way." That was Sonny's style. No chaos, no theatrics, just logic. His authority didn't come from shouting or fear. It came from trust. When Sonny said something was over, it was over. Because everyone knew that if you crossed him after that, you weren't crossing a man, you were crossing the balance. He fought to keep alive in a world built on betrayal. The disputes came in all shapes. Two earners fighting over a Shylock route, a gambling debt unpaid, a soldier thinking he deserved a bigger cut. None of it was new. The street was a carousel of greed and pride. What made Sonny different was the way he dealt with it. He didn't threaten, he reminded. He'd look a man in the eye and say, "You remember who you are. You remember who we are. No need for guns or goons." That sentence alone carried the full weight of the Bonanno name. But even a calm sea hides a current beneath it. Behind the calm, Sonny was exhausted. The street didn't stop for anyone. Every problem solved gave birth to another, and every decision, every act of justice came with a quiet toll, because in his world, fairness didn't always keep you alive. The old-timers, men like Lefty, respected Sonny's even hand. But the younger generation, the new breed, chasing easy money and TV-style glory, saw his patience as weakness. They wanted flash, speed, blood. To them, Sonny's restraint was outdated, a relic of the old Mafia. He heard their whispers, but never showed reaction. He just kept running his crew like clockwork, because Sonny wasn't there to impress. He was there to endure. On most nights, he'd leave the lounge after midnight. The air outside would still be thick with smoke and exhaust. The hum of the city pulsing faintly through the empty streets. Sonny would loosen his tie, light another cigarette, and walk alone toward his car. In those quiet moments, he thought about the men he'd outlived, the ones who'd been louder, faster, hungrier. He thought about Lefty, his oldest friend, always broke, but always loyal. And now, Donnie, the young jewel thief with sharp eyes and calm hands, someone who reminded him of himself. Before time had hardened him, he carried those names like stones in his chest. Because leadership in the Mafia wasn't just about calling shots. It was about bearing the ghosts of the men who followed you. Every soldier who went down on a bad deal. Every debtor who disappeared before paying up. Every act of mercy that came back as betrayal. Sonny bore it all. He once told Donnie, over a quiet drink, "You know what they don't tell you about being a boss. It's not the money or the power that gets you. It's the weight of keeping everybody's soul together while you're losing your own." Donnie didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between them said everything. Sonny's kind of leadership was rare, the kind that held a crew together, not through fear, but through respect. When he walked into the motion lounge, the room straightened. When he spoke, men listened. And when he told them to cool down, they cooled down. But there was one thing Sonny couldn't control: time. The old code he believed in, the balance he fought to protect, was dying around him. New faces brought new ways, greed without patience, loyalty without meaning. The streets were changing, and Sonny could feel it. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew. He was one of the last of his kind, a man who believed that being a gangster meant having rules. He wasn't a saint, far from it, but he believed that respect should outlive fear. Still, the pressure never let up. He was juggling tensions inside the Bonanno family, dealing with the fallout of aging bosses, and keeping an eye on the feds who were always watching. And through all that, he had to protect Donnie, because Sonny had vouched for him. And in the Mafia, a man's vouch was sacred. If Donnie went bad, if he turned out to be anything other than what Sonny swore he was, then Sonny's word His reputation, his very life, would be worth nothing. He knew the risk. He accepted it. Because to Sonny, loyalty wasn't a choice. It was his nature. At home, that weight followed him. He'd pour himself a small glass of whiskey, light one of his last cigarettes of the night, and look out at the water. The city lights shimmered, reflecting on the surface like memories. His birds rustled quietly in their cages, the only sound in the stillness. Sometimes he'd whisper to them, as if they were the only ones he could talk to without consequence. "Everybody needs somebody to believe in them," he'd murmur, "even me." And in those words, he revealed more of himself than he ever did to his men. Because behind the calm, behind the authority, there was a man tired of carrying everyone's faith, a man who'd given his whole life to a code that no longer fit the world around him. But Sonny didn't know how to stop. You didn't just quit being who you were. You carried the weight until it crushed you. That was the truth of his command. The Motion Lounge, the streets, the men under him, they didn't just define him, they consumed him. He was a leader, a mentor, a protector. And though the burden grew heavier each day, Sonny Black Napolitano never faltered, never broke. Because a man who lived by the old code didn't fear the weight of command. He respected it, and he knew that one day the same weight he carried so quietly would be the one that brought him down by 1980. The storm that had been quietly building around Sonny Black Napolitano was ready to break. He didn't know it yet. Every envelope passed under the table, every meeting held in a dimly lit room was already documented in photographs and wiretaps. The Bureau had been patient. They'd been watching, listening, waiting. The web was complete, and the spider was sitting in the center, spinning slowly. And the irony, the quiet, cruel irony, was that the one holding the final thread, the one who would pull it tight and bring the whole structure down, was sitting right next to Sonny most nights, drinking with him, laughing with him, calling him friend, Donnie Brasco, or Joseph D.P. To those who knew the badge beneath the alias, the operation had become one of the FBI's most successful and dangerous undercover infiltrations in history. Peastone had spent years cultivating this illusion, an identity so seamless that even the sharpest eyes in the Bonanno family couldn't see through it. His cover was airtight, his story flawless. He'd been in too deep for too long. But now, the Bureau's patience was fraying each month. They got thicker reports, audio recordings, photos, and coded notes that mapped the veins of the Mafia from the inside. They knew who reported to who controlled which gambling den, who owed who money, who was next in line for power. For the FBI, this was history being written in real time, and at its heart stood Sonny Black Napolitano, unaware that his right hand was the source of it all. To the FBI, Sonny wasn't just another capo, he was the key. He was respected across the 5 families, a man who dealt clean and avoided unnecessary noise. Through him, the Bureau could chart the structure of the Bonanno family like an anatomy lesson, understanding the flow of money, influence, and loyalty. But inside the Bureau's offices, there was division. Some agents began to worry that Peastone had gone too far, that he'd started caring about the very men he was supposed to bring down. One supervisor leaned back in his chair after reading another one of Donnie's reports and muttered, "He's not writing like an agent anymore. He's writing like he's one of them. And maybe, in some quiet corner of his mind, Joe Peastone was. Meanwhile, Sonny's world was getting louder. The Bonanno family was under pressure from law enforcement, from rival families, and from its own fractured leadership. The old hierarchy was splintering. Bosses were dying, getting indicted, disappearing. Sonny tried to hold his corner steady. He wasn't greedy like others. He wanted stability, respect, continuity. But you can't build peace on a foundation that's already cracked. The feds were moving closer, and Sonny could feel the tension, even if he didn't yet know its source. There were whispers about bugs in phones, vans parked too long down the block, faces that didn't belong showing up around the motion lounge. Still, he kept calm. He'd lived long enough to know that paranoia was a silent killer in their business. You start looking over your shoulder too much, he once told Donnie. You end up tripping over what's in front of you. He didn't realize that what was in front of him was the danger. Donnie's dual life was reaching its breaking point. Each morning, he'd write detailed debriefs, coded notes for the FBI, full of names, dates, and figures. Each evening, he'd return to Sonny's world, where loyalty wasn't written down, it was lived, day after day, through trust and silence. The FBI analysts combed through every word he sent them. They tracked cash drops, mapped crew relationships, and started cross-referencing Sonny's operations with other criminal networks. By now, the Bureau had enough to dismantle major portions of the Bonanno family gambling rings, loan shark operations, drug connections, but every new success for the Bureau meant another nail in the coffin for Sonny and his men, and Peastone. Donnie was the one hammering them in. He didn't like to think of it that way. When he sat across from Sonny at the motion lounge, when Sonny gave him advice about life and loyalty, when Lefty cracked a joke that made them all laugh, Joe Peastone buried his conscience beneath professionalism. He told himself, "You're serving the law. You're stopping them from hurting others." But part of him wondered, and what about the ones who never hurt anyone but themselves? The ones like Sonny. Sonny's reputation began to grow beyond his crew. He was becoming a figure of influence, not because of ambition, but because people trusted him. That kind of authority was rare in the Mafia's new era of greed. It made him both respected and vulnerable. He started to appear on FBI radar summaries more frequently. The reports described him as calm, intelligent, discreet, a stabilizing figure in a volatile organization. They noted his connection to one Donald Brasco, believed to be a small-time jewel thief and earner under Lefty. Ruggiero Peastone's cover had held for nearly 6 years, and the Bureau had almost forgotten to question it. The more deeply embedded he became, the more they treated him as an instrument rather than a man. Every meeting he attended was another wiretap waiting to happen. Every conversation another piece of evidence. Still, Peastone's handlers started worrying about him. The line between undercover and underworld was blurring fast. One of his supervisors warned, if he's not careful, he's gonna forget which side of the badge he's on. And they weren't wrong, because while the Bureau saw Sonny as a target, Donnie saw him as something else, a relic of a time when loyalty meant something, even in crime. He admired the man's calm, his fairness, his quiet dignity. That admiration was dangerous. It made him hesitate. By mid-1981, the Bureau had enough. They were ready to move. They had reams of evidence, hours of wire recordings, photos, and transcriptions. But there was still one problem. They hadn't told Peastone. They were about to pull him out. They were afraid he'd refuse. He'd grown protective of his family, of Sonny especially. He felt that leaving without warning would put Sonny directly in harm's way. And deep down, he knew once his identity was revealed, Sonny wouldn't run. He'd stay. He'd face whatever came, because that's what men like Sonny did. That thought haunted Peastone. Every night, as he left Sonny's apartment or the lounge, he'd sit in his car for a few minutes before turning the key. He'd stare out at the rain-soaked streets and whisper to himself, "You're not one of them. You're not." But his heartbeat told a different story. Inside the bureau, tension was high. The operation had gone far beyond its initial scope. 6 years undercover was unprecedented. The FBI's brass debated whether to end it cleanly or push for one last push. One final set of indictments that could shake the entire Mafia structure. One senior agent argued, "If we stop now, we lose momentum. We've never been this close to cutting into the heart of the Bonanos," another countered. "If we go another month, we might lose Peastone." They all knew what that meant. 6 years was too long to live a lie, too long to pretend. The danger wasn't just external, it was internal. The psychological unraveling that came from existing in two worlds, from caring about men you were built to betray. Meanwhile, Sonny went about his days as if nothing had changed. He still visited his birds every morning, still walked the same streets, still greeted his neighbors with a nod. But around him, things were tightening. He could sense the unease in Lefty's eyes. He could hear the tension in his crew's conversations. He knew the law was watching, but he didn't know how close. One night, over drinks, he told Donnie, "These feds, they think they're smart, but they don't know who we are. They don't know what we stand for. You can't catch honor in a wiretap." Donnie smiled faintly. He wanted to say something, anything, but his throat tightened. He excused himself to the restroom and leaned over the sink, staring at his reflection. The face that looked back wasn't his anymore. It was Donnie's. The man he'd created had swallowed him whole. The next morning, in an FBI office filled with stale coffee and cigarette smoke, agents huddled over a table piled high with files. A photo of Sonny Black Napolitano lay at the center, a grainy surveillance shot of him walking out of the motion lounge. A red circle was drawn around his head. "This man," one of the agents said, tapping the photo, "is finished." No one in that room understood that the man they were about to destroy wasn't a monster, wasn't a tyrant, just a man holding on to a dying idea of loyalty in a world that had already forgotten what that meant. But Donnie Brasco, Joe Peastone, he understood, and it broke him a little more every day, because when the Bureau moved closer to Sonny, it wasn't just closing in on a target. It was closing in on him. The year was 1981, and the air around the Bonanno family felt heavy, electric, like the last seconds before a thunderstorm breaks. No one could see it, but the trap was almost shut for 6 years. Sonny Black Napolitano had walked calmly through the underworld, unaware that every step, every deal, every late-night conversation had been mapped, recorded, and archived in federal storage rooms. The FBI's great machine, the operation that had begun as a whisper, was now roaring toward its finale. And at the center of that storm stood two men, one with absolute trust, and one drowning in guilt. Sonny and Donnie, the boss and the ghost. The FBI knew the end was close. They had gathered enough evidence to make headlines for decades. Recordings, wiretaps, coded conversations, meetings that confirmed the inner workings of the Bonanno crime family. For them, this wasn't just a case. It was history. But for Joe Pistone, Donnie Brasco, it was something else entirely. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. Every time he met Sonny for coffee at the Motion Lounge, every time Lefty joked about making him, every time a deal went down, his mind kept flashing to the truth that once this operation ended, everyone he'd grown to respect would die. That's what success meant. In FBI headquarters, the agents were already planning extraction. They spoke clinically, like surgeons preparing for a delicate operation. "Pull him soon," one said. "Not yet," another argued. "We're close to a major internal shift. Napolitano's getting more power. We need that mapped." They were right. Inside the Bonanno family, power was changing hands fast. Bosses were falling, arrests were shaking the structure, and Sonny was stepping into a larger role, organizing crews, calming tensions, rebuilding order. He wasn't doing it for glory. He never did. He did it because that was the code. Someone had to hold things together when everyone else was losing their heads to those around him. Sonny seemed unshakable, the calm in the chaos. But to the FBI, that calm was terrifying, because the higher he climbed, the more catastrophic the fall would be. Donnie watched it all unfold from both sides. He attended FBI debriefings during the day, men in suits flipping through photographs, pointing at charts, discussing indictments. Then, at night, he'd step back into the smoky lounges and dark apartments of the Bonanno world, where loyalty wasn't written, it was lived. That double life had reached its most dangerous point. He'd grown too close, too human in the eyes of the very men he was meant to betray. Sonny, meanwhile, was preparing for something big. He was thinking about expanding his crew's influence, a long-term plan to stabilize business after the chaos of the past few years. He had plans for Donnie too. One night, over bourbon and a quiet waterfront view, Sonny said, "You're good, Donnie. You know how to handle yourself. You're smart. You don't run your mouth. Guys like you don't come around often anymore." Donnie forced a smile, but the words cut deep. "He didn't deserve them," Sonny continued. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time I take you further up. Sonny Black's got a spot for you. You done right by me." That was it. The moment that sealed everything. If Donnie were ever made, it would mean Sonny had put his reputation and his life on the line for him. A single lie that would cost men their blood. The FBI couldn't wait any longer. Orders came down from the top. Pull him out, now. They knew the risks. If the Mafia ever learned Donnie was an agent, every man who'd vouched for him, Lefty, Sonny, anyone tied to him, would be marked for death. Pistone protested. He begged them for more time. "Let me warn them," he said. "Let me talk to Sonny, to Lefty. They deserve that." But the Bureau was unmoved. "You talk to no one," his superior said flatly. "You're done. We can't risk it." Donnie stared at the table in silence. His pulse throbbed in his temples. He'd built this identity, lived it, bled for it, and now they wanted him to vanish. The next evening, he met Sonny as usual. The Motion Lounge was quiet, shadows stretching across the floor, jukebox humming in the background. Sonny was relaxed, sipping his drink. He looked at Donnie and said, "You ever think about how this life ends?" Donnie froze. Sonny smirked faintly. "Ain't no retirement plan in this thing. You go out in a suit, either at a wedding or a coffin." He chuckled, but his eyes were serious. Donnie nodded, barely managing to speak. He wanted to tell him, to say, "Get out while you can, Sonny, please," but he couldn't. One wrong word, one flicker of fear, and it would all be over right there. So he said nothing. Meanwhile, the FBI tightened its surveillance. Agents tailed Sonny's crew, intercepted calls, and finalized paperwork for indictments. The operation that began years ago as a seed of an idea was now a full-blown takedown in motion. They had no idea what the predame emotional fallout would be, that when the headlines hit, when names were released, when the Bonanno family realized what had happened, it would trigger one of the coldest internal purges in Mafia history. Sonny Black. Napolitano's name would be at the top of that list. But for now, he was calm, sitting at his favorite table, smoke curling upward, unaware that the man across from him wasn't his protege, but his executioner in a suit. And Donnie. Donnie was a ghost, trapped between two worlds, watching both close in. He knew what was coming. He could feel it in the silence between their words. Every laugh, every handshake, every quiet night felt heavier, like the end of something sacred. The trap was set. The Bureau was ready, and soon the man who lived by loyalty would die because of it. It began, like all endings do, with silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it swallows it whole. The kind that makes a man hear his own heartbeat, pounding against the ribs like a caged thing. In that silence, somewhere in Brooklyn, Sonny Black Napolitano sat at his usual corner table in the motion lounge, sipping from a half-finished drink. He didn't yet know that his world, the codes he lived by, the family he built, the honor he clung to, had already shattered beyond repair. At that very same moment, across the city, the FBI was preparing to go public. 6 years undercover, dozens of indictments, the single most successful infiltration in Mafia history, and the cruelest betrayal any man of the old code could suffer. That morning, Joe Peastone, or rather Donnie Brasco, woke up in an anonymous safe house, stripped of everything that made him who he was. No jewelry, no gun, no leather jacket. His hair was shorter now, his mustache gone. In the mirror, he looked at his reflection and barely recognized the man staring back. The Bureau agents congratulated him, shaking his hand, patting his shoulder. "Hell of a job, Joe. You did it. You took down the Bonannos from the inside. You made history." He nodded mechanically, but inside he felt nothing. There was no victory here, only a hollow ache. He'd lived another man's life for 6 years, shared bread and danger with people who'd trusted him completely. He had worn their world like a skin, breathed it, and now he'd peeled it off, leaving behind ghosts that would never forgive him. The news hit the streets like a bomb. Every newspaper, every TV channel, every whisper in the underground carried the same headline: "Undercover FBI agent infiltrates the Bonanno." Crime family operated as Donnie Brasco for 6 years. Names began to surface. Arrests followed. Photographs leaked. Donnie laughing beside mobsters, shaking hands, sitting at tables once thought untouchable. In small black letters, buried beneath the chaos, there it was: Benjamin Lefty Ruggiero and Dominic Sonny Black. Napolitano, under investigation for ties to undercover agent for most. It was just another sensational revelation. For Sonny, it was a death sentence. At first, Sonny didn't believe it. He was sitting in the bar when one of his guys, trembling, walked in with a paper in hand. "Sonny, have you seen this?" He looked up, calm as ever, eyes narrowing slightly. "What is it?" The man hesitated. It's about Donnie," says he's an agent, an FBI guy. Sonny chuckled lightly, the kind of laugh that comes from disbelief. "You been drinking too early, Donnie. The kid who's been bustin' his ass with me for years." "Nah." But the man didn't smile. He placed the newspaper down, and there it was, Donnie's face staring back at him, next to the bold black letters spelling out FBI Undercover Operation. The world seemed to slow. Sonny stared at the image for a long, silent moment. No words, no movement, just the distant hum of the jukebox in the corner and the faint smell of cigarette smoke. He didn't slam the table. He didn't shout. He just folded the paper slowly, neatly, and placed it aside. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "So, it's true." He walked outside, the Brooklyn air heavy and gray. The waterfront breeze brushed past him. His hands were steady, but his chest felt tight, like a stone pressing down. He lit a cigarette and stood there, staring at the horizon, the same view he'd looked at for years. The water was still, but his mind wasn't. He thought back to all those nights with Donnie, the talks, the laughs, the plans, the loyalty. He remembered Donnie's quiet presence, how he listened more than he spoke, how he never tried too hard to impress. He'd always admired that, and now it all made sense. The subtle questions, the way Donnie seemed to know things before he should, the long disappearances. He saw it now, clear as day, all the signs he'd missed because he'd wanted to believe. Back in the Motion Lounge, the mood shifted from confusion to rage. Lefty was pacing like a man possessed, muttering curses, disbelief clouding his face. He played us, Sonny, 6 years. He played all of us. You, me, we vouched for him. We made him. But Sonny wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised anymore. He just sat there, lighting another cigarette, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, low. "It ain't about him, Lefty." Lefty stopped pacing. "What the hell you mean?" Sonny looked up. "It's about us. We forgot the rules. We let someone too close. We broke the code." That silence, again, heavy, suffocating. Lefty sank into a chair, his face pale. "You think they're human for us?" Sonny nodded slightly. "They already decided." Word moved fast in the Mafia. Within hours, the Bonanno hierarchy had gathered, furious and humiliated. A rat had infiltrated them, not just any rat, but a federal agent who had walked among them for years, eating their food, sitting in their meetings, taking their trust and turning it into evidence. Someone had to pay, and in the old world, accountability flowed upward. Sonny Black Napolitano was the man who'd vouched for Donnie Brasco. That made him responsible. In the days that followed, Sonny didn't run. He didn't hide. He went about his business as usual, feeding his birds, sitting by the window, keeping his shoes polished, his shirt crisp. When neighbors greeted him, he smiled softly. When his men came by, he gave quiet instructions. But inside, he'd already accepted the verdict. He once told a friend years ago, When your number's up, it's up. Don't cry about it. Just walk like a man. Now it was time to live by those words. He knew that any day now, the phone would ring or a car would pull up, and that would be it. He'd climb in, take a ride, and never come back. Meanwhile, Donnie was thousands of miles away, living under a new name, guarded by agents, his every move monitored. He couldn't stop thinking about them, Sonny and Lefty. He asked about them constantly. What happened to them? Have you heard anything? But the Bureau avoided the topic. They knew it would destroy him to hear the truth. He'd been trained to detach. But how do you detach from something that became your life? Every night, he dreamed of the motion lounge, of Sonny's calm voice, of the soft clinking of glasses. In his dreams, Sonny wasn't angry. He just looked at him with tired eyes and said, "You did what you had to do, Donnie. So will I." Back in Brooklyn, the call finally came. Sonny was told to report to a meeting. Nothing unusual on the surface. A sit-down to clear things up, to talk about the papers. He nodded, said he'd be there before he left his apartment. He took off his jewelry, emptied his pockets, and removed the keys from his ring, even the one to his front door. He fed his birds one last time, left their cage open so they could fly free if no one came back. Then he put on a clean shirt, straightened his collar, and walked out the door. He didn't lock it behind him. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Donnie felt it, that something final had happened. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just the echo of a bond that went deeper than the lies that built it. Sonny's body would be found months later, in a decomposed state in Staten Island, hands missing, a bullet to the head. It was the old way, the way of silence, the price of honor. The FBI celebrated the success of Operation Donnie Brown. 6 Mafia families exposed, over 100 indictments, millions in assets seized. But in that triumph, a few men remembered what it cost, the trust of those who'd lived by a code, the death of a man who'd done nothing wrong except believe in loyalty. Sonny Black Napolitano didn't die because he broke the rules. He died because he followed them, because when the world around him turned to treachery and fear, he chose to face his fate with dignity. And in that quiet, inevitable walk toward death, he became something greater than a mobster. He became a symbol of what the Mafia once pretended to be, a brotherhood built on honor. Even when the honor killed you, the morning air over Williamsburg was heavy that day. Not stormy, not bright, just gray enough to match the mood of a man who knew the truth but never spoke it out loud. Dominic. Sonny Black Napolitano rose early, the same way he always did. He wasn't the kind of man who stayed in bed. Not even now, when the ground beneath his world had already begun to crumble. Habit was his armor. Routine was his code. And when everything else was falling apart, he held tighter to both. He went about his day quietly, brewed coffee, took his seat by the window, and stared out at the East River like it might give him an answer. There were pigeons on the windowsill again. He'd fed them every morning for years. They were his small joy, the one part of his life untouched by the business, by loyalty, by betrayal. Just birds, freedom in feathers. He sprinkled the feed, watched them flutter and coo. One perched on his hand, unafraid. Sonny smiled faintly. "You fellas don't know how good you got it," he murmured down the block. The neighborhood was waking up, trucks groaning over cobblestones, shopkeepers lifting metal shutters, kids running late for school. Ordinary life, still turning, while his was winding down. He didn't show it, but Sonny already knew. He'd known since the first whisper about Donnie Brasco being an FBI man. The second those headlines hit the street, old loyalties snapped. Paranoia flooded the ranks like a sickness. Every man looked at the next with suspicion, and at the center of it all, Sonny. He was the man who'd vouched for Donnie. He was the man who'd opened the doors. He was the one who'd made it possible in the old world of the Mafia. That meant one thing: he was responsible, even if he'd done nothing wrong, even if he'd followed every rule, even if his heart had been loyal. It didn't matter. The code didn't care about fairness. The code demanded payment. And Sonny, being who he was, wasn't going to argue with that. He'd seen too many men try to outrun their fate. Men who begged, men who hid, men who thought they could reason with a storm. It never worked. The thing about the life, his life, was that once you took the oath, you agreed to play by the rules, no matter what hand you got dealt. That was omerta, the silence, the acceptance. Sonny wasn't a philosopher, but he'd always understood something simple. You live by the code, you die by the code. No exceptions. So when the FBI papers broke and the word spread, he didn't protest. He didn't try to call in favors. He didn't even flinch. He told his closest friend quietly one evening, "If it's me, it's me. That's the life." Those words weren't bravado. They were peace. In the following days, men stopped calling as often. The Motion Lounge, once loud and full of laughter, started feeling like a tomb. Conversations dropped to whispers when Sonny entered the room. He noticed, of course, he noticed everything. Lefty stopped by once, pacing like a ghost, nervous energy dripping off him. "You hear anything?" Lefty asked, trying to sound casual, but his voice cracked around the edges. Sonny didn't look up from his chair. "Not a thing." "You think they're gonna, make a move?" Sonny shrugged lightly. "Probably. Somebody's gotta take the weight. That's the way it goes." Lefty slammed his palm against the table. "That's bullshit, Sonny. You didn't do nothin' wrong. The guy fooled everybody. He fooled me, too. Why should you take the hit for that?" Finally, Sonny looked up, calm, patient, "Because somebody has to, Lefty. You know how it is. You've been around long enough to know what's what. They can't lose face. Someone's gotta answer for it." Lefty went quiet, his face folding in on itself. "You gonna run?" Sonny smiled faintly. "Run where? I'm home." And that was that. He went about his business in the days that followed like nothing had changed. He kept the bar running, handled the books, met with his guys. He even helped one of the younger earners settle a debt dispute, calm as ever, steady as a rock. To anyone watching from outside, he looked unshaken. Inside, he'd already accepted his fate, not with fear, but with an almost spiritual stillness. Because Sonny Black Napolitano wasn't built to run. He was built to stand. One evening, one of his closest soldiers came by, nervous and pale. "Sonny, I've been hearin' things. Guys talkin' about a sit-down, about you." Sonny took a slow drag from his cigarette, exhaled through his nose. "Let 'em talk. They're sayin' it's about the papers. About Donnie." "Yeah, I figured. You want me to make some calls?" "Maybe no." Sonny's tone was soft, but final. "No calls, no favors, no run it. If it's me, It's me. That's the life. That's the way it's gotta go. The younger man looked at him, eyes watering. You don't deserve this, Sonny. Sonny gave a faint smirk. Deserve's got nothin' to do with it. None of us deserve nothin' in this life. We get what we get. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded bill, and handed it over. Here, go take care of yourself. Stay out of the street for a few days. The man hesitated. What about you? Sonny leaned back, gazing toward the window, where the light from the street lamps reflected off the rain. I'll be all right, one way or another. That night, alone in his apartment, Sonny did something he hadn't done in years. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, sat by the window, and let his mind drift backward to the early days, when he was just a kid from Williamsburg trying to make a living. He remembered his first job running numbers, the rush of being trusted with something real, the way the older guys treated him like a man the first time he collected without flinching. He remembered the faces, all the faces, some long gone, some locked away, all bound by the same invisible string of loyalty and silence. He thought about the rules. He'd lived by the ones they all recited, but few truly understood. Never lie to your friends. Never cheat your family. Never turn your back on your word. And never, under any circumstances, talk. He'd lived by those rules. They weren't just business to him. They were belief, and maybe that was his mistake, because while the world changed, while younger men got greedy, reckless, violent, Sonny stayed the same. He still believed in the old code, the quiet code. To him, being a gangster wasn't about flash. It wasn't about money or fame. It was about loyalty, about honor, about respect that didn't need to shout to be felt. The next morning, he woke before sunrise again. He fed his pigeons. He shaved. He put on a clean white shirt, pressed slacks, polished shoes, his routine unbroken. He called one of his soldiers. You got that thing later? Yeah, boss. You need me. Sonny smiled into the phone. Nah, I'm good. Just checking in. He paused. You been good to me, kid. Don't forget who you are out there. The soldier frowned. You sound like you're saying goodbye or something. Sonny chuckled. Nah, just talkin'. Go on now. He hung up, sat for a while, and let the quiet fill the room. The air smelled like coffee and dust. The clock ticked softly. The pigeons are ustled. It was a goodmorning.com, still, like the world was pausing to give him time. Later that day, the phone rang. A voice he knew, flat, polite, emotionless. Hey, Sonny, there's a meeting. You should come down. We gotta straighten some things out. He nodded slowly. All right, I'll be there. He hung up, stared at the phone for a moment, then stood. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He took his time, getting ready, cleaned his shoes again, tucked in his shirt, straightened his collar. He looked in the mirror, brushed his hair back, and for a brief second, he saw himself as he had been 20 years ago, young, hungry, proud. Then he smiled faintly and said to his reflection, not bad, kid. Before he left, he did something small but meaningful. He unlocked the pigeon cage and left the door open. You're on your own now, fellas, he said quietly. Fly straight. He left his keys on the counter, every one of them, even the key to his apartment. And then he stepped outside. The street was quiet, just the sound of the river in the distance, the hum of traffic far away. A black car was parked by the curb, engine running. Sonny walked toward it. Calm, hands in his pockets. One of the guys inside, a younger soldier, looked away, ashamed. Another nodded to him, almost respectfully. Sonny opened the back door, slid in, and said simply, "Let's go." No words were exchanged. No questions asked. The car pulled away, blending into the city's endless flow. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Days turned into weeks. The FBI knew what had happened. They didn't have to see it to understand. Donnie Peastone asked about him repeatedly, but no one had an answer to give. Months later, Sonny's body was found in a remote area near Staten Island, decomposed, hands missing, shot once in the head. A quiet death. A clean death, a death that followed the code. When the news reached the old neighborhoods, people didn't talk much about it. There was nothing to say. Some called it justice. Others called it tragedy. But the men who truly knew Sonny, the few who still remembered what the code really meant, called it inevitable. He'd gone out the way he lived, quietly, with dignity, never breaking his word. He didn't beg. He didn't run. He didn't betray. He faced it the way a man of his world was supposed to, standing tall, eyes open, unafraid. In the end, Sonny Black Napolitano wasn't a saint, and he wasn't a villain. He was something rarer, a man who lived by a dying game set of rules, in a world that no longer honored them. He'd believed in loyalty, in respect, in silence, and when the time came to prove it, he didn't hesitate. The code remained, even as the world around it rotted, because men like Sonny didn't need eulogies. Their lives were the eulogy written in the choices they made when no one was watching. And though his name faded from headlines, those who whispered about the old days, the real days, still spoke of him the same way. Sonny Black. He was the last of the true ones. The morning came soft and slow, gray light filtering through the thin curtains of Sonny Black Napolitano's Brooklyn apartment. The East River shimmered faintly in the distance, dull and heavy, like tarnished metal. The world felt quieter than usual, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting inside. Sonny moved with the same unhurried rhythm he always had. No panic, no rush, no dread, just habit, the small motions that made a life. He filled the old, dented coffee pot, set it on the stove, and lit the burner. The hiss of gas, the soft flick of a match, these were sounds he'd known all his life. He poured the water, leaned against the counter, and stared out the window while the pigeons gathered outside a small, loyal army on the ledge. He smiled faintly, his hand steady as he reached for the brown paper bag of feed. "You boys are early," he muttered. "Guess you knew I'd be up." He scattered the seeds out the window the same way he did every morning. The birds fluttered and jostled for space, cooing softly. They'd come to know his routine, same as he knew theirs. For a long moment, Sonny just watched them, the way their feathers caught the light, the way they lifted off and circled the block before coming back down. There was something pure in it, something honest. No lies, no betrayal, no codes, just instinct and trust. He envied them in a quiet way. When the coffee finished percolating, he poured a cup, black and strong. He took it to his chair by the window, sat down, and sipped slowly. The bitter warmth grounded him. The paper lay folded on the table, the daily news. Headline still fresh: FBI infiltrates Bonanno family agent Donnie Brasco exposed. He'd read it a dozen times already, and he didn't need to read it again. He didn't curse. He didn't throw it. He didn't even sigh. It was over. The Bureau had pulled their man, and the family had lost face in front of every crew in the city. The Gambinos, the Colombos, the Lucchese's, everyone was laughing. And in that world, laughter could kill you. Sonny knew what that meant. He didn't need anyone to spell it out. He'd vouched for Donnie. He'd brought him in. He'd trusted him like a son. And for that, there would be a price. The phone rang. Sonny didn't move at first. He let it ring twice before answering. Yeah. The voice on the other end was soft, careful. A man who didn't want to say too much. You around today? Yeah, I'm around. There's a sit-down later. Couple of the guys want to straighten things out. Nothing big. Huh? Sonny's tone was even. Where at? The voice hesitated. The usual spot. About 4. All right, Sonny said, and hung up. He sat there for a moment, staring at the receiver. His expression didn't change. He just nodded to himself, slow and quiet. So that's it, he murmured. He finished his coffee, rinsed the cup, and set it upside down in the sink. Then he went about putting things in order. He took a shower, shaved carefully, and put on a clean white shirt, pressed, tucked in, buttoned to the collar, black slacks, polished shoes, the same outfit he'd worn to 100 sit-downs. But today it felt heavier, like ritual clothing. He opened his closet and took out his old leather jacket. It still smelled faintly of cigar smoke and rain. He ran a hand over the worn creases, remembering the nights it had kept him warm on the docks, on rooftops, in cars, waiting outside dark bars. He slipped it on, and it fit just right before leaving the bedroom. He looked at the small framed photograph on his dresser, his mother, long gone, standing on a Brooklyn stoop, smiling in black and white. He nodded once. Ma, I'll be seeing ya. He went to his kitchen table and wrote a short note on a scrap of paper. No explanation, no long speech. Just a few words in his slanted handwriting. Feed the birds. They're good company. He left a few bills beside it. Enough for rent, maybe. Or for whoever would come after. Then he stepped to the window one last time. The pigeons were still there, pecking at the seeds. He opened the latch and pushed the window wide. The birds flinched at the rush of cold air. Go on, he said softly. Fly. Time to go. They hesitated, then lifted off, all at once, a swirl of wings and sound, disappearing into the city sky. For a moment, Sonny just stood there, hand on the sill, watching them vanish. Then he smiled. Outside, the autumn wind cut through the streets. The sky hung low, heavy with the promise of rain. Sonny lit a cigarette as he walked, hands deep in his coat pockets. He stopped by a small cafe he'd been going to for years, a corner joint on Grand Street. The same waitress still worked there, same red hair, same tired smile. Hey, Sonny, she said, setting down his cup before he even asked. Haven't seen you in a few days. Been busy, he said. You look tired. He chuckled quietly. Guess I am. He drank his coffee slowly, savoring it. Around him, life carried on, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clatter of plates, a Sinatra song humming low from a dusty radio, for a man walking to his death. He looked utterly at peace. He left a tip under the saucer, too much, probably, and nodded to the waitress on his way out. Take care, kid. By early afternoon, he was home again. The river breeze had picked up, and the light outside had turned gold and sharp. He stood in his living room for a long time, just looking around at the framed photos, the old armchair, the empty pigeon cage. Every object had weight now. He checked his watch. 3:40-5. He took one last drag of his cigarette, flicked it into the ashtray, and whispered, "All right." Then he picked up his car keys, slipped on his sunglasses, and walked out the door. He didn't lock it behind him. The car was an old Buick, dark blue, polished. It smelled like tobacco and vinyl. He started the engine, let it idle for a moment, then pulled into traffic. Brooklyn rolled by in slow motion. Brick buildings, corner stores, kids chasing a ball between parked cars. Life moving on. Sonny drove without hurry, one hand on the wheel, the other resting against the door. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't make any calls. He just drove, silent, thinking. He thought about Lefty, about how the kid would probably get called in next, about how unfair that was. Lefty didn't deserve it. Once a betrayal hit the surface, the ripples swallowed everyone. He thought about Donnie Joe, the FBI man who'd lived beside him, eaten at his table, laughed with him, listened to his stories. For 6 years, he'd treated that man like blood. And somehow, even now, knowing everything, he couldn't bring himself to hate him. Maybe that was the worst part, because a man can forgive betrayal, but he can't forget trust. He turned down a narrow street near the docks, the river glittering faintly beyond the warehouses. The sun was setting, bleeding orange across the skyline. When he pulled up to the address he'd been given, a black car was already there. He parked behind it, killed the engine, and sat for a moment. The air was still. The city seemed distant, muffled. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, and lit one, took a drag, exhaled. "All right," he said softly to no one. "Let's get it over with." He stepped out, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the car. The men inside didn't make eye contact. One of them nodded to the passenger seat. Sonny climbed in without a word. The door shut. The car pulled away. No sirens, no screams, no drama, just silence, the sound of tires on asphalt, the hum of the city fading behind them. Later that night, the car was seen crossing into Staten Island. No one saw it come back. Days passed, then weeks, and somewhere deep in a marshy stretch of land near a desolate road, the code closed its circle. When word reached the street, no one was surprised. Men muttered quietly in bars, shook their heads, poured one out. But even among the cold-hearted, there was a strange kind of respect in their tone. Because Sonny didn't run. He didn't hide. He didn't betray. He faced it. The window was open, the cage empty. The wind carried their soft coos across the rooftop, as if they were calling for the man who had fed them every morning, the quiet boss who lived and died by the old code. "If it's me," he'd said, "it's me." And in the end, it was. The house sat quietly on a narrow Brooklyn street, the kind of place nobody noticed, half hidden behind a rusted fence and a patch of overgrown weeds. Inside, the curtains were drawn, and the air was heavy with the smell of cigarettes and old wood. It was the kind of place where secrets went to die. Sonny Black Napolitano pulled up in front of it, just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the buildings. The sky was fading into that deep New York orange, the color of endings. He sat in his car for a long moment, engine idling, eyes fixed on the chipped front steps. He knew who was inside. He knew why he was there. There was no anger left in him, no pleading, no regret, just a kind of weary calm, the same peace he'd shown in every choice that brought him here. For a man who had lived his whole life by a code, this was the natural conclusion. He turned off the ignition. The street went silent, except for the faint sound of wind brushing through the trees. He looked down at his hands, resting on the steering wheel. Those same hands that had brokered deals, calmed tempers, fed pigeons. The same hands that had built trust, and now would pay for it. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his pack of cigarettes, and shook one free. His fingers didn't tremble. He lit it, inhaled deeply, and watched the smoke drift toward the windshield. Then he opened the car door and stepped out. The pavement crunched under his shoes. His shadow stretched long behind him. He flicked the cigarette into the gutter and started toward the door. When he reached it, he paused just a second, taking in the silence, and then he knocked once. Twice the door opened. A man he knew, quiet, blank-faced, gave a short nod. "Hey, Sonny." "Hey." They didn't shake hands. Sonny stepped inside. The door shut behind him, and that was the last time anyone saw Sonny Black alive. Days passed. Then a week. Then to Dot in the underworld. Silence carries its own meaning. When a man disappears and no one speaks his name, everyone knows the story without hearing it. Lefty knew. The moment he heard that Sonny had gone to a meeting, he knew what it meant. He didn't ask questions, didn't need to. He just sat in his apartment, staring at the phone, waiting for the inevitable knock that would come for him to Dot. The bureau knew as well. When they heard that Napolitano had been called in, the agents exchanged grim looks. They'd been watching the fallout unfold like a slow-motion car crash. The Bonanno family scrambling to clean up the mess left by the Donnie Brasco sting for the bureau. Sonny's death wasn't a surprise. It was confirmation. Proof that the Mafia still followed the old rules, brutal, but consistent. But for those who knew Sonny, truly knew him, it wasn't just a statistic. It was the end of something human. Weeks later, they found him in a desolate patch of land near Staten Island, not far from the water, where the city forgets its own dead. The marsh grass was high, the ground soft and dark. His body was decomposed beyond recognition, but the message was clear. His hands were gone. In the Mafia, that wasn't just cruelty, it was symbolism. You lose your hands when you vouched for a man who betrayed the family, when your hands have brought shame taught to outsiders. It seemed barbaric. To those inside, it was ritual. But those who had truly known Sonny saw it differently. It wasn't about punishment. It was about closure, the cold arithmetic of the code he'd lived by. He'd said it himself. If it's me, it's me. There were no surprises. News of his death spread quietly. No headlines. No TV cameras. Just whispers in bars and back rooms. Sonny's gone. Yeah, they found him. Good man, old school. Even in that world of predators, there was respect in the way they spoke his name. He hadn't flipped. He hadn't begged. He hadn't blamed anyone. He'd walked through the door, knowing exactly what waited for him on the other side, and he hadn't looked back. That's why they respected him, because he stayed true, even at the end at the FBI office. Joe Peastone sat in silence when he got the call. The room around him buzzed with activity, phones ringing, typewriters clacking, men congratulating each other on one of the Bureau's biggest victories. But Joe didn't celebrate. He just stared at his desk, jaw tight, eyes unfocused. Sonny's face flashed through his mind, the calm smile, the steady voice, the way he'd always said, "You don't make noise. You make sense." He thought about the pigeons on the roof, the quiet talks about life, loyalty, and trust, and now the man who'd embodied all of that was gone because of him. Joe had done his job, but some victories don't feel like triumphs. Sometimes they feel like funerals. In Brooklyn, the pigeons still gathered every morning. They waited on the ledge outside Sonny's window, pecking at empty space, cooing softly. A neighbor noticed it, how they'd come like clockwork, waiting for the man who wasn't coming back. Eventually, she started tossing them crumbs, whispering, "He'll be back soon, boys." But he never was. The window stayed closed. The apartment stayed silent, and the pigeons, loyal to the end, kept returning. Sonny Black's death marked more than the loss of one man. It marked the end of an era. The Mafia was changing louder, greedier, more reckless. The quiet men who ran things with dignity and restraint were vanishing, and with Sonny's execution, a certain kind of honor disappeared too. He wasn't the richest, the most feared, or the most famous, but in a world built on deceit, he'd been something rarer, a man who kept his word, even when that word cost him his life. There's an old saying in life, you don't get old being stupid, and you don't get remembered for being loud. Sonny lived by that. He wasn't the one making headlines, throwing parties, or chasing power. He was the quiet one in the corner, listening more than he spoke, the kind of man whose silence carried weight. That silence was all that was left of him, the echo of a door closing on a Brooklyn street, the whisper of pigeons' wings overhead, the faint hum of the city swallowing another name. For years afterward, old-timers would talk about him in low tones. Sonny Black, they'd say. Now that was a man. And though the world moved on, and new faces took the streets, his story lingered like smoke after a fire. The last member of a dying code, the boss who chose honor over survival. When the storm finally passed, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like silence. The streets of Little Italy, once alive with coded whispers and backroom deals, grew strangely quiet in the months after Sonny Black disappeared. The cafes where men used to gather in pressed shirts and low voices now felt hollow, echoes without meaning. The laughter was forced, the handshakes cautious, the loyalty bought cheap. The Bonanno family was still standing, technically, but everyone knew it wasn't the same. Something had cracked at its foundation, something that could never be repaired. Sonny was gone. Lefty was gone. And Donnie, well, Donnie was never really there to begin with in those early days. Word spread quietly through the underground that the Bonannos had been embarrassed. The FBI had walked straight through their door, not with force, not with a raid, but with charm and patience, wearing the mask of friendship. The betrayal hadn't come from a gun. It had come from a handshake. That was the part that broke them. Old dash timers couldn't make sense of it. How could a man sit at the same tables, eat the same meals, talk about loyalty, death, and respect, and all the while wear a wire under his shirt? You could feel the paranoia like static in the air. Every conversation turned cautious. Every meeting ended with second guesses. No, one trusted anyone anymore. The younger guys, the new breed, tried to shrug it off. They said Sonny was a fool for trusting too much, for living like it was still 1955, when honor meant something. But even they lowered their voices when his name came up, because they knew the truth. Sonny Black Napolitano had been everything they pretended to be. He wasn't ruthless or reckless. He didn't make money by burning bridges. He made it by being fair, by listening, by understanding that fear doesn't last. Respect does. And when he died, the respect died with him. Lefty Ruggiero's fate came shortly after. Everyone knew it was coming. He had vouched for Donnie. He had stood up for him, defended him, bet his own life on him. And in the Mafia, when you vouch for a man, you're signing your own contract. When Donnie was exposed as FBI, Lefty knew there would be no mercy. The day before he was supposed to take a ride, the Bureau quietly picked him up, not to save him, but to keep him from becoming another body in the newspaper. Lefty spent the rest of his life in and out of courtrooms, aging quietly, stripped of the world that once gave him purpose. He used to say that in the old days, a man's word was gold. Now it was counterfeit, and maybe he was right. As for Donnie, or Joe Pistone, as the world would later know him, he vanished. The Bureau pulled him out, changed his name, and buried him under layers of protection. But though he escaped alive, he didn't walk away clean. He carried the ghosts with him. Lefty's trust, Sonny's calm, the faces of men who believed in him. In interviews years later, Pistone admitted that there were nights when he couldn't sleep, when he heard their voices in his dreams, when he wondered if the mission had cost more than it gave. Because when you live in the dark long enough, you start to forget which side you're really on. For the fallout was catastrophic. The FBI had torn through their ranks with information gathered over 6 long years. Dozens were arrested. Entire rackets collapsed. Safe houses were raided. Millions of dollars in hidden revenue vanished overnight. But the real loss wasn't in money. It was in faith. Faith in the code. Faith in each other. Faith that the Mafia could survive the modern world. Could see it in the eyes of the men who remained. The hollow look of people who no longer believed in the thing that had once given them meaning. That life had turned into a job. One more hustle. In a city full of them, in the old days, a man like Sonny Black commanded respect with just a look. When he walked into a room, the conversation stopped, not out of fear, but reverence. He represented an ideal, the kind of leadership that didn't need to shout now. The rooms were full of noise, too much noise. Everyone wanted to be the next boss, the next name, the next legend. But nobody wanted to be the man who took the fall quietly, who accepted fate with grace. Sonny's death had become more than a tragedy. It had become a symbol, a reminder that in a world built on lies, even the honest criminals don't make it out alive. The Bonanno family limped through the next few years. The FBI, emboldened by the success of the Donnie Brasco operation, doubled its pressure. Wiretaps, informants, surveillance. The old days of whispers and handshakes were gone. It was no longer about loyalty or respect. It was about survival. The bosses who came after Sonny fought each other like rabid dogs, desperate to hold on to something that was already slipping through their fingers. By the late 1980s, the once powerful Bonanno family had become a shadow of itself, fractured, paranoid. crawling with undercover agents. The men who had lived through it never forgot the feeling. Those long nights sitting in the corners of Brooklyn bars, half drunk, half afraid, talking about ghosts. Lefty, Sonny, the good old days when men like them ruled the city with quiet certainty. Now they ruled nothing. Even the pigeons were gone. If you'd walked by Sonny Black's old apartment after the storm, you'd still hear them sometimes, a few lonely birds cooing on the roof, out of habit, waiting for the man who fed them. The building was older, the paint peeling, the air stale. The city had moved on, swallowed the memory of the men who once shaped its nights. But for those who remembered, the few who still carried that sense of old-world loyalty, his name was never forgotten. Sonny Black, they'd say softly, almost like a prayer. He went out the right way. In a world that betrayed its own code, he was the last man who lived and died by it. The FBI called it a victory. The papers called it an operation. But in the quiet spaces, the bars, the rooftops, the empty streets, it was something else. It was the death of the old Mafia. The men who replaced them never understood that the power they chased was built on something fragile: respect. And once that was gone, the rest crumbled after the storm. All that remained was a memory, a whisper in the dark, a ghost feeding pigeons on a Brooklyn roof. The city didn't mourn. It rarely does, but the night did. The night remembered. Sonny Black, the story of Sonny Black, Napolitano, didn't end in that Brooklyn basement where the door closed and silence followed. It lived on in whispered conversations, in the pages of FBI files, and in the haunted memories of the men who knew him. Because Sonny wasn't just another mobster. He was the last man of honor in a world that had forgotten what honor meant. In the years that followed the Donnie Brasco operation, something remarkable happened, something no one in the FBI expected. When agents talked about Sonny, their tone changed. They spoke with respect, not the kind you reserve for power or fear, but for integrity. Even Joseph D. Pestone, the man who had brought Sonny down, couldn't hide the truth when he looked back. Sonny was a good man, Pestone said once in an interview. If he hadn't been in the life, I would have been proud to call him a friend. It was a rare admission, one that cut through the cold professionalism of undercover work. Because even after years of deception, even after the arrests, the trials, and the headlines, Pestone couldn't erase what he had seen in Sonny. A man who lived by his word, who didn't run, didn't betray, and didn't break among the bureau. Sonny became a kind of paradox, the honorable enemy. Agents who had studied him, tailed him, listened to his phone calls, all came to the same conclusion. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't greedy. He wasn't cruel. He didn't kill for pleasure or scheme for fame. He led because people trusted him. And in the underworld, that's the rarest kind of power there is. The FBI's reports on Sonny are still studied today, not for the crimes he committed, but for the way he carried himself. He followed the old Sicilian code of omerta, not as a weapon, but as a way of life. No boasting, no betrayal, no business with fools. He treated everyone, soldiers, earners, civilians, with the same quiet respect. And when things went bad, when he realized what was coming, he didn't plead for mercy or look for a way out. He simply said, "If it's me, it's me." 6 words that captured an entire philosophy: fatalistic, calm, proud. a man of the old world, facing the new world's chaos with his head held high, even inside the FBI. Agents used his name as a benchmark. When new recruits studied the Brasco case, they were told, "Look at Sonny Black. He's what made the operation so hard. You don't catch men like him twice." Because operations like Donnie Brasco weren't just about infiltration. They were about psychology, reading people, manipulating trust. And Sonny was the kind of man you couldn't fake around for long unless you truly became part of his world. That's why Keystone lasted 6 years. That's why it broke him when it ended. Because men like Sonny made you forget which side you were on in the underworld. Sonny's name became something else, a legend, almost a myth. Even those who had turned informant or left the life spoke about him with quiet awe. Sonny went out like a man. One of them said years later, "Didn't beg, didn't rat, didn't run." You don't see that anymore. To the next generation of mobsters, his story became a cautionary tale and a standard they could never live up to. They called him the last honorable boss. And even those who had never met him, kids who grew up hearing the stories, said his name like it meant something sacred. There's a moment from Keystone's memoir that captures the paradox better than anything else. He wrote about how he thought of Sonny after the operation, long after he'd left the undercover world behind. Sonny believed in his code. He stood by it until the end. I respected him for that. I still do. If I'd been born in another time, maybe on another side, maybe I would have been one of his men. That's the truth that makes the story so human and so tragic. The FBI agent who destroyed him couldn't help but admire him, because loyalty, once given, doesn't disappear. It just changes shape in the long corridors of the Bureau. The case files are clean and clinical. Operation Sunapple, Donnie Brasco, Bonanno family infiltration, 1976 to 1981. But between the lines, in the unspoken margins, there's another story. A story about two men, one bound by duty, the other by honor, whose lives collided in a way neither could control. One lived in the light, pretending to walk in the dark. The other lived in the dark, carrying a light that never went out. Today, if you visit Brooklyn's waterfront, near the old neighborhood, the world has changed. The cafes are gone. The warehouses turned into condos. The pigeons long scattered. But sometimes, if you stand still long enough, you can almost feel it, that quiet weight in the air, that old-school dignity, Sonny's kind of silence, the kind that doesn't come from fear, but from peace. In the end, even the men who hunted him, the FBI, the prosecutors, the journalists agreed on one thing. Sonny Black Napolitano died the way he lived, standing tall, saying nothing, keeping his word. And that, in any world, lawful or lawless, is the definition of honor. If you've been walking through these long nights with us, hit that like, share, and subscribe. Because here on Sleepy Gangster Nights, we remember the ones who lived by the code and kept their silence, even when the world stopped listening. Time moves differently for men who live by the code. For most years, fade into memory. For others, they turn into echoes that never stop. And for Joseph D. Keystone, the man the world came to know as Donnie Brasco, those echoes never quieted when he looks back now. Decades after the undercover operation that tore apart one of the 5 families, he doesn't see the glory or the headlines. He doesn't see the FBI medals or the movie premieres. He sees a face, the calm, weathered face of Sonny Black Napolitano. P-Stone has said it before, and when he does, there's no triumph in his voice, only weight. Sonny didn't deserve what he got. He was a stand-up guy, one of the last of his kind. That kind of admission doesn't come easy from a man trained to see the world in black and white, good versus bad, law versus crime. But in the shadows of the Mafia, things were never that simple. Sonny wasn't a saint. He was a criminal, a capo, in one of the most powerful mob families in New York. He made money from illegal rackets, enforced debts, and kept order through power. Yet there was something different about him, something old-fashioned, something you couldn't fake. He had a quiet moral compass, one forged not by religion or law, but by loyalty. He believed in the code not as a shield, but as an identity. And when the world around him started to crumble, when greed replaced respect, when noise replaced silence, he stayed true to it, even when it cost him everything. There's a story P-Stone once told about the last time he saw Sonny. It wasn't dramatic. There was no grand farewell, just two men sharing a moment in a cafe, both unaware of how close the storm was. Sonny talked about expanding business, about moving up in the family. He spoke with that calm tone, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to command respect. And P-Stone, sitting across from him, pretending to be a jewel thief named Donnie Brasco, felt something strange, guilt, real, heavy guilt, because somewhere deep down, he knew that this man, this boss, had become something more than just a mark, a friend, a mentor, a mirror. When the truth finally came out, when the FBI blew the operation wide open, and every newspaper in America ran the headline, "Undercover Agent Infiltrates the Mafia," Sonny's fate was sealed. He didn't curse Donnie. He didn't rant or rage. He just accepted it. "If it's me, he said, a line that became his legacy. Those words weren't defeat. They were dignity. They were the sound of a man walking toward his fate with his head high. He didn't run. He didn't snitch. He didn't cry for mercy. He just went, and somewhere, even in the FBI offices where agents celebrated the success of the most ambitious undercover mission in Bureau history, there was silence, because they knew they had broken something sacred. Years later, P-Stone would write that Sonny's death haunted him more than any other part of the operation. He knew it was inevitable, that in the Mafia, betrayal meant death. But knowing it and feeling it were two different things. Every time he thought about the pigeons Sonny used to feed on the rooftop of his building in Brooklyn, he felt it. Every time he read another file, another cold report that reduced a man's life to target eliminated, he felt it. And when he saw what the Mafia became after Sonny, chaotic, loud, treacherous, he knew what had been lost. The old code died with him, and so did the kind of loyalty that once defined the life today. When people talk about the Mafia, they talk about greed, power, corruption, Netflix, documentaries, and bullet holes in history. But behind all that, there's something quieter, a story about human contradictions, a story about friendship in a world that forbade it, about loyalty in a world built on lies, about men who found brotherhood in the dark, only to lose it in the light. And that's what Sonny Black represents. Not the violence, not the money, but the cost of keeping your word in a world that rewards betrayal. He was the boss who didn't beg, the man who didn't break, the friend who didn't flinch, and in the end, he paid the ultimate price, not for power, not for revenge, but for friendship. Decades later, Donnie Brasco still dreams about that world. The smoky back, the late-night conversations, the smell of espresso, and fear in the air. And sometimes, when he talks about it, his voice softens. He was the last of the old kind, he says quietly. A man who kept his word, even when it cost him his life. That's not something you forget. That's not something you escape. It becomes part of you, a ghost that doesn't haunt, but reminds, because loyalty like that doesn't die. It just waits in the silence, like an echo of another time. And so, as the night closes in over Brooklyn, and the lights of the city flicker against the water, we remember them. Lefty, who loved like a brother. Sonny, who led with honor. And Donnie, who lived between both worlds, carried their ghosts. The loyalty trilogy ends not with a bang, but with silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than anything else. If you've been with us through this long night, hit like, share, and subscribe to Long Gangster Nights, where loyalty never sleeps, and silence still speaks louder than words.